Good evening. Give me 1 second. All right. I think I'm live. Let's see. All right. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. It's Dr. Hunt here. Welcome Monday night to our Monday night episodes. Today we're gonna talk about chapter 2 in the book. But before we do, I wanted to give you guys an update on some of the 30-day challenge. I had they get messages about the 30-day challenge, people. And so one was today, and she lost 2.6 pounds in a week, which is really awesome because average weight loss is 1 to 2 pounds a week. And so she did, more than that. And some people might say, well, is that the same person who lost 6 pounds the first week? And it is. And you might say, well, she lost 6 pounds the first week, but she only lost 2.6 the second week. And what I want to tell you with a low carb diet, the half of the weight you lose in the beginning is water weight. And the reason is because when you reduce your insulin levels, it actually helps you expel any excess water that you have. And in fact, a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't eat salt because salt helps you retain water, which it does. But what people don't know is that insulin is just as powerful in retaining water. And so when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, your insulin level spikes and you suck in or pull in a lot of water. So you get a lot of water retention when you eat a lot of carbohydrates. So you could think in terms of water retention, you could think of carbohydrates just like you think of salt, because you get very similar effects from eating a lot of carbohydrates. And at the same token, when you reduce your carbs, half of that weight that you lose is getting that excess water off. And so, and that was almost exactly right with her. The first week she lost 6 pounds. The second week she lost 2.6 pounds, which is almost half, which is what we would expect. But the fact that she's doing better than 1 pound a week, better than 2 pounds a week, is amazing. Because if you think about that, if she's doing almost 3 pounds a week times 4, that's 12 pounds in 1 month. And that's an amazing accomplishment. So I just want to say hats off to her. And I wanted to just make sure that I made that clear as well, so that everybody knows what that is all about. And so, without further ado, we're gonna talk a little bit about chapter 2. So chapter 2 is called The Fat Truth. And it's about fat and telling the truth about fat and what we've all been told about fat, but what the actual truth is about fat, and kind of giving you, the inside look as to why we even think the way we think. So we think, or we've been taught, that fat makes you fat. I mean, and it kind of makes sense, right? Fat makes you fat. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And the question is that true? The short answer is no. It is not true at all. Can you store fat if you eat fat? Technically, yes, but that's not what makes our fat cells grow in general. Carbohydrates is what makes our fat cells grow, because you can't store fat unless you have high insulin levels. And fat does not increase your insulin levels. And so that's the one thing. So the question then would be, well, where did this notion of fat, causing, people to gain weight come from? It's it's really a lot to unpack, so I'm not gonna bore everybody with a lot of it. But one of the things was that fat packs the most calories, and so people thought, well, because fat, gives you 9 calories per gram, and protein and carbohydrates only give you 4 calories per gram. There's more calories in fat. So if you eliminate fat, you reduce your calories more effectively. And you do reduce your calories more effectively, but you don't reduce your fat more effectively. So that's the one thing. And then the second thing is that there was there's history to this, and I talk about it in the book, No Guesswork, where there was a researcher named Ansel Keys who believed this theory that fat, in particular saturated fat, caused problems with heart disease. And so he did a study, or basically a review of people who had, in countries who had high levels of fat intake in their association with heart disease. And he showed a pretty impressive relationship that the more fat you ate, the higher your risk of heart disease. And this was in 6 countries. And so that got people abuzz. And then people were like, oh my God, I gotta stop eating fat. This was a little bit before we were, using that strategy to decrease our weight. So 1, we thought fat caused heart disease, and 2, we thought fat was the cause of you to gain weight. And so another group of researchers, however, looked at the same data that Ansel Keys looked at and realized that there were other countries that also had data about their fat consumption. And when you added those countries in, it wasn't a clear relationship. In fact, some countries who ate more fat had lower heart disease. And so it wasn't a nice little circle. And so, but by that time, the whole fat thing had already taken off. And so no matter what anybody said, it was like fat is bad, fat is bad, fat is bad. And so it's not until more recent that we know that that's not the case. In fact, what is the most heart healthy diet? And if there are people out there, when I say that, I bet many of you out there would say, oh, a Mediterranean diet. And that would be correct, at least based off the studies. The New England Journal of Medicine, published a study, the PreDiMed study, that showed that based off of different diets, that out of all the diets that they tested, that the Mediterranean diet was the best for your heart health. And guess how much fat is in a Mediterranean diet? If you look it up, the Mediterranean diet is composed of 60 to upwards of 80% fat. So if someone wants to say that fat causes heart disease, then why is the most heart healthy diet the best for your heart? It doesn't make sense. And I go into detail. I'm not going to go into detail and bore you here, but I go into detail in No Guesswork to give you some more depth on that. So if someone tells you about fat, you go, well, why is it? You just let them just say, well, why is the best diet for your heart, the Mediterranean diet, full of fat? And they just scratch their head. Now, people will say, oh, it's healthy fat. Okay, that's fine. It's still fat. And so you can't lump fat all in one bucket. And so that was the one bad rap fat got. But it turns out that we know now that fat is not bad for your heart in that sense. Now, people might say, well, what about saturated fats? And I talk about that in the book too. I'm not going to go into detail, but long story short, that saturated fats, and based off the studies, is pretty neutral. Monounsaturated fats, the so-called healthy fats, have been shown to be helpful. And so fats are not bad for you. So, I know that's a shocker to a lot of people, but read the book, you'll see. Now, the second part of all of this is, well, fat makes you gain weight. And again, it turns out that that also is not true. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is carbohydrates that make you gain weight because you increase your insulin when you eat a ton of carbohydrates. Actually, if you eat more fat, like the Maasai in Africa, which they don't eat any carbohydrates. They're very thin, lean, with prowess, muscular. They don't eat. All they eat is fat. And if you look at in the North Pole with the Inuits, before they became westernized, all they ate was fat, blubber from the whales and seals and all those things, and they were very thin. And so those are just examples of, well, if fat makes you fat, well, why, when people eat a ton of it, actually most of their diet is composed of fat, why don't they get fat? And it's because that's not the way physiology works. Because fat doesn't increase your insulin, so that therefore it doesn't allow you to store fat, but carbohydrates do. And so that whole thing came from Senator McGovern when they started the first dietary guidelines for America. And he had gone to this retreat where this guy named Nathan Patinkin was preaching that a high carb diet is good for you. And so we decided as a nation to reduce our fat to less than 30% and increase our carbohydrates to 50 to 60%. And if you look at the graph in my book, it's in 1977, the exact same time we changed, that's when obesity took off, because we added so much more carbohydrates to our diet, and then obesity took off from there. And so this is kind of a wake-up call. Like, we reduced the fats the way that they wanted us to, and then we had low-fat Snackwell cookies and low-fat this and low-fat that. Yet, even though we reduced our fat, obesity continued to rise. And the reason is because of carbohydrates. Now, you might argue that, well, it's because we started eating a lot more. Okay, I'll buy that. We did eat a little bit more. But if you look at the last decade, the last 10, actually 20 years of data that shows the amount of calories that a typical American takes in, it's pretty flat. So from late 1970s, it went up. But then around 90s to 2000s, to around the 2000, it's been about the same from 2000 until now. Yet, obesity continues to rise. So you can't say, well, it's calories in, calories out, because if that's the case, well, calories have been the same for the last, 10, 20 years. So why are we still gaining weight? Obesity increases 1% every single year. So then why are we still gaining weight? Well, then somebody, a smart person might say, well, it's because we don't move as much technology. Everybody's on their smartphones. Okay, that's a good comeback. But then if you look at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's data that looked at that from 2010 to 2016, it shows that our activity levels from that period has been flat. So we haven't gone down in our physical activity. It's actually been about the same. So if the calories in have been the same and the calories out have been the same, why is obesity still going up? It's carbohydrates and what we talk about in the book, something called insulin resistance. So the more carbs you eat, the more insulin resistant you become. The more insulin resistant you become, the higher your insulin goes. And it's this vicious cycle. And so every year you continue to gain weight. And that's why obesity continues to go up about 1% a year. And if we don't do something to reduce our carbohydrates, it will continue. And in fact, the CDC predicts that by the year 2030, which actually isn't that far away, obesity will be at 50% of all adult Americans. We're already at 42.4%. And so if you really do the math, it's gonna be worse than 50. It'll probably be something like 51 or 52%. by the year 2030. And if you add overweight to that, it's going to be almost 90% of us. And by 2030, we'll have overweight or obesity. And so that's crazy. That's scary. Obesity is a disease. And so why aren't we ringing the alarm? Why aren't we doing something about it? Well, some people would say we are. We're telling people to exercise more. Well, I already told you, for those who have watched these episodes before, 80% of weight loss is diet. So yeah, we want that 20%. But why are you focusing on the smaller part that's gonna give you the least bang for your buck? Why not focus on the diet? Oh, well, we tell people to focus on the diet. We tell them to cut their fat. We know cutting fat isn't the answer to that, because we've done that. Like, we used to be around 40% back in the 1970s of fat intake. And they said, you know what? You need to drop it to 30% or less. Look it up. We've done that. Still gaining weight. But guess what we didn't do that we should do? We increased our carbohydrates to almost 60%. And so what we should do is reduce our carbs. But that's not what we've done. And so we keep focusing on the wrong things and wondering why for the last 50 years, and wondering why nothing is getting better. And in fact, not only is it not getting better, it's getting worse. Again, every single year we go up 1 more percent in obesity. I would think, like, after a while, somebody might scratch their head and say, hey, wait, maybe the advice we're giving might not be the right advice. Maybe we should look at it and do something different. And I'm not obviously the only person out here who understands this. There are a bunch of experts out here who understand it, but there are obviously powers that be that want it to be the same way that it is. And so we will continue to allow people to gain 1% a year. And then we'll just keep going, and we'll keep going. And until one day someone says, stop, wait a minute. We need to reduce our sugars, and we need to reduce our unrefined carbohydrates. And whenever, I just want to make a point here, whenever I say carbs, what I mean is sugars and refined carbohydrates. Because I was talking to my students today, my residents today, and a resident pointed out to me that fiber, which is a carb, is actually good for you. It's good for insulin. It's good. And she is absolutely correct. But when I say carbs, what I mean is sugars and refined carbohydrates, the breads, the rice, the pastas, the potatoes, all of the refined things that are chopped up and turned directly into sugar when it gets into your bloodstream. And so what the chapter 2 is talking about is trying to, give you the truth about fat, and also let you know what we should be really focusing on and what we should really be trying to reduce. And those are the bad carbs. Like, the good carbs are fiber. We love fiber. Fiber is great. You should always eat fiber. But the sugars and the refined carbohydrates are what drives insulin up and what drives fat it drives the sugar into your fat cells. So, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I didn't want to go too crazy on what we talk about, but one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I stress is that overall, fat is not bad for you. The diet that is the best for heart health is a diet that has 60 to 80% fat, which is a Mediterranean diet. Fat does not make you gain weight because we reduced our fat and our weight continues to go up. And in fact, people who live in societies like the Maasai, the Inuits, and other communities actually eat mostly fat, and they are very thin, and they are muscular and have prowess. And so if that's the case, then they need to explain why those communities have that. And people who do a keto diet, for instance, they have a lot of fat in their diet. In fact, A well-formulated low-carb diet, whether it's keto or not, actually is high in fat, around like a Mediterranean diet would be, like a 60% fat. And in fact, the diet that we promote for No Guesswork is a Mediterranean diet, but a low-carb version of the Mediterranean diet. And so I wrote this book to kind of clear the air so people would understand these. I mean, there's references in the back, so you can look at those references and see where the information comes from. And we try to explain it very simply so that you understand what you're doing. Because there's so many diets out there, it's dizzying. It makes, like, what do you do? What's good for you? What's bad for you? Someone said to me earlier, well, they say a plant-based diet is good. And I agree. A plant-based diet is very good. And it's a good diet for general health. And if you do it right, it's a really good diet. It may not be the most effective diet for weight loss, however, but it is a good diet in general. And so as you do whatever you do, like whatever your goal is, if your goal is to lose weight, your primary goal should be to get your carbs down. And as you get closer to maintenance, you should convert or switch over to a Mediterranean diet / a plant-based diet. But be clear, just because something is vegan or vegetarian doesn't mean it's healthy. It needs to be a healthy version of that, because French fries are vegan and vegetarian. And by the same token, just because NGW is a healthy diet, you could do a horrible NGW diet by eating a lot of processed food, like a lot of bacon, a lot of processed foods, even though they don't have a lot of carbs. And so you can do a lot of things with any diet. My diet is a very healthy diet. The diet that we ultimately end up with is a low carb Mediterranean diet. But what we try to do, we try to keep it very simple, and we follow the 6 S's. I talk about the 6 S's to make things simple, and those 6 S's are what should be checked off when you're looking for a diet. Like when you're looking for something to do to help you lose weight, you need to like make sure that you have those 6 S's. And I go through them in the book, and they stand for, it should be relatively simple, it should definitely be safe, it should be sustainable, it should be satisfying, you should enjoy what you eat, and it should be superior. In other words, it should be one of the best diets out there for weight loss if that's what you're doing it for. And finally, it should be sugarless, because we know sugar and refined carbohydrates are bad for you. And so that is really all. I know I gave you guys a mouthful of stuff. If you have any questions about it, catch it in the book, or you can ask me a question and I will try to answer it. Someone said they read our book in the school. Oh, We Beat the Street. Yes, we do have a book. Me and my 2 best friends wrote a book called We Beat the Street and the Pact and the Bond. So I'm glad you guys are reading. I hope you enjoy it. And someone else said they grew up on our book, and I appreciate that as well. And so what I just want to end with, well, before I end, someone asked about what about sugar from fruit? And I talk about this in the book as well, and I talked about it on here before. So fruit, the word fruit in general is a good thing. But if you ask any person with diabetes, if they eat a lot of fruit, it will put them in a hospital. Like if they ate a bunch of bananas and ate a bunch of fruit that had a lot of sugar in it, their sugars would go through the roof. Ask anybody with diabetes that you know. You know why? Because your body doesn't know if the sugar that you're eating is coming from God's dessert, fruit, or if it's coming from a Snickers bar. Sugar is sugar is sugar. The reason that fruit is better is because if you eat the whole fruit, you're actually eating, there's fiber in there, so that's actually very, very helpful. But, that's why sometimes I tell my patients, like, don't juice everything, because you're juicing everything, like you're juicing fruit, let's say, and all you're getting is the sugar, and you left all of the fiber in the container. You're not even going to eat that. And so that's why for pediatricians, they don't tell parents to feed their kids apple juice or orange juice, because what they're getting is just the sugar from that fruit and not all of the other nutrients like the fiber, which is so important. And so what I tell people about fruit is that all fruit is not high in sugar. And so the best fruit to eat, particularly in the beginning of No Guesswork, when you first start the No Guesswork lifestyle, you should do berries, because berries, like a handful of berries is only 9 grams of carbs. And so, berries are great. Any berry, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, any berry, blackberries, like they're low in carb. And so, and someone said, I know I don't metabolize fructose well either, and there is fructose in fruit. But again, fruit, we don't demonize fruit. Fruit is good, particularly if you eat the whole fruit. But at the same time, you still need to understand that there are carbs in that fruit, and it's not like your body will say, well, this carb came from a fruit, so I'm gonna just put it to I'm gonna ignore that carb. A carb is a carb is a carb is a carb, unless it's fiber. If it's fiber, you're good. And so I hope that made sense. I talk a lot about it in the book to kind of try to explain all these things. And so we're going to end here, and I just want to thank you guys for joining me tonight. As always, share the live with your friends. Let people know about No Guesswork. Tell your friends about it. Check us out on YouTube. I post these on YouTube, as well as obviously on IG and Facebook. And we will see you next week. So next week won't be that. I didn't hit you with too much science, actually, I don't think, today. But next week will be, this is one of my favorites. Next week will be chapter 3, and it will be the hunger gremlin. So we're going to talk about ghrelin. Ghrelin is one of my favorite things to talk about. So we'll have a good time next week talking about that. And you guys have a great night. Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.